read it aloud to you. Luckily, the original one is pretty short. So boil 2 cups of small hominy very soft. Add an equal quantity of cornmeal with a little salt and a large spoonful of butter. Make it in a thin batter with 3 eggs and a sufficient quantity of milk. Beat all together sometime and bake them on a griddle or in waffle irons. When eggs cannot be procured, yeast makes a good substitute. Put in a spoonful in a batter and let it stand 1 hour to rise. Now, this recipe is taken from one of our favorites, which is Mary Randolph's The Virginia Housewife. So right off the bat, you may recognize some of these ingredients and you may not. So first things first, hominy may not be familiar to some of you. So I'm going to introduce sort of the main star of this recipe, and I'm going to hold it up to my camera over here that shows you my ingredients. So what hominy is the kernels of corn that have been treated by lye. And so the outside of that corn kernel dissolves away essentially. And of course, if you've ever made popcorn, you'll know that that inside part of the corn kernel can puff up. And so that's what's happened here, is it's just puffed up a little bit. Now, for this recipe, you'll probably get your hominy in a can. I doubt any of you have made it yourself this morning, but if you have, kudos to you. You'll want to pour off all the extra liquid because when it comes in the can, it's surrounded by all this water. So I've gone ahead and done that. Mine has already been drained, but you will want to drain yours before we start. Otherwise, everything will just be way too wet. So I'll give you a moment to do that, and I'll run through the other ingredients that I have with me this morning. So we have cornmeal to fill out the rest of this recipe. Oh, before I go any further, hold on. I have to start my burner because I'm working on an old stove here and it's a little bit slow to the start. I'm going to turn mine on. You're welcome to turn yours on too if you also have a little bit of a slow stove. But we're going to do that and then get back to our ingredients. Now, I like turning on mine on a medium-low heat, and that's because this guy can be a little bit temperamental. But we can always adjust it once we get everything up to actually cooking on the griddle. So back to our ingredients, cornmeal. So instead of using flour like you might for pancakes, we're using cornmeal as our basis for sort of the rest of the body of this pancake, this hoe cake. And then to help it all kind of bind together, we have milk, we have eggs, and then we also have a little bit of butter and salt. Now, I already cracked my eggs. I did a little bit of kitchen magic prep here, but I have not beat them yet. And you will want to beat them up so that way they mix together better. Oops, here we go. Let me switch so that way you can see me and my hand's not blocking the camera. So you'll just want to beat them together quite gently. Nothing too vigorous is necessary. There you go. Nicely done. All right, so I've got my mixing bowl here. I'm going to go ahead and pour in all of my cornmeal, and that is 2 cups. And I was not terribly exact this morning, and neither do you need to be. Essentially, if you are more or less in the ballpark, you are okay. This is a recipe that is flexible. So the next thing that we want to do is add our salt in. So here is my little bit of salt, not too much. Sprinkle that on in. Set that out of the way as well. Hold on 1 second. There we go. Now, we've got that. We've got our hominy, which hopefully by now you have drained. And we're going to go ahead and add that in. So at this point, the hominy is going to sort of need to be incorporated with everything else. I have a spoon to help me out here. So I'm just going to gently kind of toss it around.
Hey,
so that
Laura,
yes, ma'am.
We have a question in the chat. Tell us, can we use all-purpose flour to replace the cornmeal?
Yeah, you could do that. So it'll taste different in the end. But in the 18th century, cornmeal, flour, rye flour, all these different things are being used as these sort of things to bind together your ingredients. So yeah, you could use flour. It'll just taste different than it comes together. It might cook a little bit differently. Lacey, I believe you tried this recipe with gluten-free flour, or was that next week?
I used gluten-free cornmeal.
There we go.
So I think the texture will be very different. They will come out very differently. And batter cakes, hoe cakes, and Johnny cakes, which is another name for this recipe, they all are ones that use cornmeal rather than flour. We also, Laura, have a question if there's a good substitute for hominy.
Ooh. So the thing about hominy is that what you're really getting out of this is texture. It's lumpy bumpy. And personally, I really like that. But as someone who's made a lot of this Johnny cake, batter cake, hoe cake variations, 100% you could just use cornmeal. You could use cornmeal and flour mixed together. You can make a mixture of cornmeal, flour, and rye. You can mix together just about any kind of grain that you would use for a bread preparation. You can do with this. Of course, if you've never done it before, you may not get a result that you're entirely familiar with. But at its core, this is the same sort of thing that you use to make pancakes today. And this is meant to be a flexible, improvised recipe. So even though this particular recipe was published in a book as a really formalized thing, most people who are making this are doing this off the cuff. This is something that if you are a working class person, for instance, you're going to improvise with what's in your kitchen. If you're an enslaved person and you only have limited access to certain kinds of ingredients, again, that's an improvisation. The Masons, however, being as wealthy as they are, have a more steady stream of ingredients. And so they might have a formalized recipe. We know the Washington family records a formalized recipe for the hoe cakes that they like to eat. So it kind of depends on who you are, what's in your pantry at any given time. So we've got our hominy and our cornmeal all mixed together, and I'll hold it up so that way it's a little bit visible here, but you can just see it's just coated nicely. And so
Laura, we also, sorry, go ahead and mix, and then we've got a couple of questions.
How about I finish mixing real quick? So the next thing we're going to add is our melted butter, eggs, and milk. Now the butter, we've heated it up a little bit just so that way it's liquid, it's soft, but it's not hot. We don't want to add super hot butter to this. So we pour that on in. And then I'm going to add in my milk. And it's 3/4 cup of milk. I'm cheating and just doing a cup of milk that I've not filled up all the way. And then I'm going to stir that together, and then I'll add in my eggs. Just helps it kind of make it a little bit more consistent. And if you mix this all together and you think, oh, this isn't wet enough, this is still too dry, I can still see lots of clumps of things, you can add more milk to that. This is, again, a very improvised recipe that you can adjust to your own taste. So let me add in my eggs, and then we'll see where we're standing with the sort of viscosity of our mixture.
So I made this gluten-free and dairy-free to test out how the recipe came out for those of you who have those dietary restrictions. And I determined that I needed a little bit more liquid in mine, just because of the way the liquid soaked up. So I added a little bit more than the liquid that was called for.
And this is one of those recipes where, like when you're making pancakes at home, just regular, ordinary, you know, American pancakes, your liquid to dry ratio sort of depends on the humidity in your kitchen. And so you just may need to add a little more liquid. You may need to add a little more dry ingredients. It's sort of one of those, you just have to sort of look at it and see what's going on.
And that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm looking at this going, I'd like this a little bit wetter. So I'm just going to splash in just a tad bit more of milk. That was probably not even 1/3 cup or 1/4 cup. But I noticed that I had some cornmeal that had escaped me at the bottom of the bowl. So do make sure that you get really underneath and that you've got all of it incorporated. But some people like a more solid, robust cake, and so they'll put less liquid in. Other people like it to run a little bit, make a much thinner cake, and so they will put more milk in. And if you don't have milk on hand, you can use water as well. Of course, it won't be nearly so rich, and of course, depending on the kind of milk that you put in, it will also change a little bit. So, all right, so this has come together really well. I'm going to put just another little bit more milk in. So I've probably got about a cup of milk in total in here today. But I know the last time I made this, I used right about 3/4 cup. And this is a recipe that I have tested few times now, and I think every time I've done it, it's come out a little bit different. All right, so that is really nicely mixed together. So I'm gonna make sure I tilt up so y'all can see it. So you can see when I lift it up, it does want to sort of fall out of the, it's not sticking horribly to the spoon. But again, there is no 100% right or wrong way. So don't feel like if yours doesn't look exactly like mine, that it's wrong. You're still okay.
So Rachel and Laura, we have a question in the chat about what is hominy?
I had my husband go run to the cabinet and grab, so that hominy tends to come in a can or a tin like this. And so, which is not where one would normally, look for, so it's not next to the cornmeal. It's sort of over there with the vegetables in the corn aisle. And it's treated with lye, correct? And I always get these, yep. There's like things that are treated, corn that's treated many different ways. And so hominy is treated with lye. And so it's soft.
Yeah, it's a little bit, it's not squishy exactly, but it does give, if you bite down on it, it's not a hard kernel, and it doesn't, like I said earlier, the outer layer, that outer part of the corn that when you eat corn on the cob kind of pops a little bit, that's gone. So all you're left with is what we call the germ on the inside.
So that when you make popcorn, that little part that gets stuck in your gums after you eat popcorn, that part is gone.
So I'm going to pause for just a second. I am going to go ahead and put my lubricant on my pan here. So I am using some off-brand nonstick cooking spray here today. But if you want to, you can actually fry these in oil. I have done that. It works perfectly well. However, this is my safety PSA for the day. You do need to be careful because you are frying in oil, and unlike a cooking spray where it just thinly coats the tray, when you're frying it in oil, you have a significant, layer there on the pan. And if you flip something and it hits too hard, the hot oil will splash. Ask me how I know. And so today, for simplicity's sake, but also just to show you that it is completely possible to do this in a modern way with this kind of cooking spray, I'm using the cooking spray. And I only put just a little bit on there to cover the pan. And I do reapply it after I've done a couple rounds of cooking to make sure that my pan stays greased, because this is just meant to kind of help us keep things from sticking too much. So I've got a little ladle here. You can see I've grabbed that much, stuck it on there. I like to smush mine down a little bit just to make them more griddle cake-like.
Just so everyone knows that that ladle is about 1/4 cup.
Yeah, thank you. It's a little ladle. I like it a lot, actually, because it keeps you from making things too big. And I'm going to do, I can fit probably 3 in my pan here, no problem. So I'm going to put a 3rd one in there. But of course, if you like, and you're testing how long it's going to take to cook yours, you can just do 1 or 2 at a time. That is 100% fine. In fact, I'm going to smooch mine around a little bit. There we go. Give them a little bit more room. You want to give it about 1 to 2 minutes per side. And again, this depends on how hot is your griddle. What is the thickness of your batter? Just keep an eye on it, essentially. Just watch it very closely. If you cook your first couple ones and you think this isn't what I want, fix your batter. Just add a little bit more milk or add a little bit more cornmeal. You are not bound to keep cooking with a batter that you do not like. That was one of the most important things I learned when I started doing this recipe, was feel free to change it as you go along. So of course, this is the part of the recipe where we just got to be patient and wait. So this is the perfect time to ask questions.
We do have one in the chat that I'm going to throw at both Rachel and Laura.
All right.
About Measurements in the 18th century. Are the measurements, was a cup then the same as a cup now? Was a spoon the big one that you're using, or a teaspoon or a tablespoon, or what? Any standardized measurements in the 18th century, or are we making it up as we go along? Tell us what's what, ladies.
Yes and no. So some measurements, as far as we know, they are the same. So generally speaking, if we read a cup in an 18th century recipe, it's a cup now. However, you do get some unusual directions in 18th century recipes. So you may have noticed in this particular recipe, it says something like a sufficient quantity of milk. It doesn't tell you how much milk. It says a sufficient quantity of milk. The recipe is expecting that you will be familiar enough with cooking that you should know how a batter should come together, which of course is not great if you're a brand new cook trying to navigate this. Other times you'll see things that list a goodly amount. How much is a goodly amount? It depends on context. It's not terribly helpful. So you get some things that we can read and we go, yes, I know exactly how much that is. That is perfectly helpful.
Laura,
other things, not much. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry to interrupt. Before you flip, can you hold them up closer to the ingredients, Cam, so we can see them, please?
Yep. So mine is a thicker batter today, so it's not quite doing the bubbly around the side thing. I might thin out my batter for my next couple ones, and then you'll be able to see what it means by like bubbling at the sides. I'm kind of doing it by sound a little bit. And I'm also watching my clock, and I am giving it that sort of 1.5 minutes. The first one I flipped over, and this one too, they're a little bit paler than the third one here. And that might also depend on where things are placed on my burner. So sometimes I rotate things as I cook just to make sure that they're getting even heat. Don't be afraid, just like a pancake, to flip it back over to the first side you started and give it a little bit longer. And again, it's all personal preference. If you are someone who likes really dark pancakes, go for it. If you like yours barely cooked, also go for it. Just make sure that you've cooked your egg all the way through. We don't want anyone getting salmonella.
There is was talking with two friends this morning saying that I was coming here to talk about hoe cakes, whereupon we had an hour-long discussion about what's a hoe cake, what's a Johnny cake, what's a what's what.
Yeah.
So there are as many ways to make these and to name them and to how thick they should be and how brown they should be and what ingredients go in them. And we still debate about it now. So what yours looks like totally depends on what you want it to look like. This recipe that we're using right here is completely different than Amelia Simmons' recipe, which has molasses and white flour in it. So,
which I can vouch for putting molasses in your recipes. That is something we've not done as much in the last 50 years of cooking, and we should definitely bring it back. There we go. So I added a little bit more liquid again to mine because I don't mind a nice sturdy hoe cake like that. But for the sake of showing you guys how it does cook differently, I'm gonna just make this just a little bit looser.
And when Laura and I worked together on an 18th century tenant farm, the way one would make a cake like this would simply be cornmeal, salt, good amount of salt, or they're not going to taste like anything, and boiling water. And you'd let it sit for a few minutes for the boiling water to cook the corn a little bit. And then you'd fry them in lard, which also gives them some flavor. The lard always gives a nice flavor to anything. And you could, so it's simply cornmeal, salt, and water. And
so I'm gonna pause for a second to let you guys know. So one of my cakes, let me see if I can hold it up so it's easier for you to see, is a little bit more cooked than the rest. And that one actually smells a little bit like popcorn. So if you've ever smelled, really well cooked popcorn, that's what it smells like. So that's also a really good way for you to tell, like, is my hoe cake done? If you start to smell that finished popcorn or burnt popcorn smell, you're done.
Speaking of popcorn, Laura.
You can also cut into it a little bit and see how it looks in the middle. So like this one's nice and thick.
We've got some comments in the chat, Laura, that we want to share with you.
Yeah, please do.
Lacey, read the one about the popcorn one. I thought that would fit in nicely.
Oh, please, yes.
Oh, I missed the popcorn one. Where is
The
that?
last one from. I grew up in
we've got
Virginia
pumpkin.
eating
Pumpkin hoe cakes with Jiffy Meal cornmeal and pumpkin. Now, if you like your Jiffy Meal hoe cakes with pumpkin, you should definitely try out our pumpkin fritter recipe from last fall. That is on the website. You can check that out.
They were
but
delicious.
They were
Oh,
so
they
good.
were so good.
So good.
So yeah,
And
talk about
We
season-
also have a
make them
comment
seasonable.
about honey being added to a recipe, although not perhaps authentic. Thoughts, ladies?
So the Washingtons report that they like to have theirs served with honey on top as a condiment for it. I personally have not seen a recipe that includes it as part of the main batter. But no, honey was used in the 18th century as a sweetener. So if that's to your style, I don't see why not. Rachel, do you have thoughts?
No, wasn't George Washington supposed to like have drenched his like in
I believe the verb they used was swimming in butter and honey. So clearly this was something that you had to have access to a copious amount of honey and butter for. You know, if it's just like today, people take their pancakes with all sorts of different things. Some people like maple syrup. I know my family is really partial to huckleberry syrup. We got hooked when we were out west in Wyoming. And so we now take great care to always have a supply of huckleberry syrup in our cabinet. Other people like molasses. So yeah, it's same as before. Okay. So this time I do have that look that I'm going for. So I'm going to bring my pan over so you can see. So these ones, because they were more viscous, you can see that they've kind of rounded a little bit at the corners. They've actually lifted up and away from the pan. And so that's how I can tell that that bottom layer has cooked. I can leave it for a little bit longer at that point, just to make sure that I'm cooked. But at that point, it's safe to flip it. Like it's gonna be solid enough that you can get your spatula under and flip it over. And of course, if you have an itty bitty little pan and you're doing them one by one, you could be real fancy like a crepe maker and, you know, just shish kebab the whole thing. I'm not going to do that on this pan. And so now that it's on there, it is going to stick just a little bit. Let it sit for a minute. It'll cook, solidify up, and then you should be able to shake the pan and see it kind of shuffle a little bit. But yeah, the honey is definitely a good condiment for this, especially since the cake itself is not super sweetened. You could add sugar to the recipe if you're someone who likes a really sweet cake. It's not my personal taste, but again, this is very personalized.
So I am looking at the time and we are nearly to the end of our time today. Laura is probably going to hang out and make some more batter cakes, finish up her batch there. You can see she's got a little bit more in the bowl. But I do want to take a moment to thank everybody for joining us today. I am so excited seeing people on camera cooking their batter cakes. I hope you enjoy them. I hope they're tasty. Serve them however you like. And as we wrap up today, I do just want to take a moment to let you know about a couple of things. Firstly, I'm going to put a link to an evaluation in the chat. We would love to know what you thought about this program today. We would love to know if we met your expectations, if there's something we can do better in the future. We would also love your support in planning these programs. So we are able to do these programs and offer them on a complimentary basis because of the generosity of viewers like you. We are able to research and experiment with recipes, give them a test run because of the donations of our members and others who choose to support us here at Gunston Hall. So if you find that you are interested in giving to us, I will also put a link for our donation page in the chat. Otherwise, I'll bring Laura back up on camera and we've got a few minutes before the end of our program today. If you have any other questions, do feel free to drop them into the chat, or if you're interested in asking them out loud, you're more than welcome to. Just do remember, if you turn your camera on and you turn on your mic, you will be recorded as a part of this program.
So real quick, before I take any questions, I wanted to show people I cut one in half so that way that's finished. And you can see that hominy there. So you can see the hominy is this sort of big chunky stuff. And then you can see the rest of it is just that cornmeal, which just cooks up like a regular old batter. And this one is nice and cooked all the way through. You know, of course, if you split it like this and it's runny, especially if you can see that egg in there is still really yellow, cook it for a little bit longer. Like I said, we don't want anyone getting sick from these because these are delicious. We want this to be a positive experience. So these ones look like they're done. So I'm gonna scoop on out onto the finished tray. And this time I am gonna spray my pan again because it did okay last time, but it's probably ready for a refresh. So I'm gonna get all my extra scraps out there. Any questions that folks have?
We did get a question about what our next History in the Kitchen is about, Laura.
Oh, yes. So this is actually one that I'm really excited to do because, you know, we often get questions about, did people back then eat the same things that we do today? And the answer, of course, is yeah, sometimes they did, sometimes they don't. And this next one is near and dear to my heart because it's parsnips. And parsnips are one of those vegetables that I think gets a bad rep nowadays. Because unless you've had them prepared by someone who really knows what they're doing, they can be bland, they can be too chewy or too mushy. And so we're doing a recipe that is super simple, super easy, but hopefully adds a little variety to your meals. And it's parsnips, which you boil. That part's super easy. And then you make a cream sauce for it. Also super easy. And then it comes together really well. The first time I did this recipe, I had it with my lunch that day and I ate the whole bowl. I didn't think I was going to, I thought I was going to like nibble on a little bit of it. And the next thing I knew, I had eaten the whole bowl of parsnips. And the nice thing about it too is that the cream recipe is very adjustable. So whether you're fixing 3 parsnips like I was, or you're making a pound of parsnips for a whole, you know, Thanksgiving meal, very easily adjustable. So that means between now and not next weekend, but the weekend after, so this will be March 13th, you can go grocery shopping for your parsnips. And so just like before, I'm going to, you know, on my pan, you can see I can slide these around a little bit. I'm going to give it just a little bit longer to cook. But no,
while Laura is cooking those last couple, I do want to mention some other programs that we have coming up in the near future. We've got stewed parsnips on March 13th. We do have an archaeology symposium next week. Unfortunately, that one is fully sold out. However, it will be recorded and be put up on our website as well. And in March, on March 10th, we're starting a program called Something Different in the Garden, which will be a Facebook Live program at 10:30 on Wednesday mornings, running for 4 weeks, talking about all kinds of different experiences in 18th century gardens, from families like the Washingtons to people who were enslaved and Native Americans, and how they used their gardens to support themselves. So we hope you'll be able to join us for any of those programs. We'll hang out for just a minute or two more if anyone else has any other questions. If not, we'll see you next time.